Hey, do you think you don't have what it takes to be an author? You're wrong. This week on the podcast, you're going to hear from four-time author Frank Reddy, and you're going to hear him talk about his early struggles and how he was able to overcome some of the big ones that we all face, like imposter syndrome, self-doubt, fear of failure. Spoiler alert, there are no shortcuts. A lot of it is just putting in the work and finding your voice. But according to Frank, if you do that, you're going to find success in your writing. So be sure to check out this episode. You're going to love it. This is part 2 of my interview with Frank. So if you missed the first part of our conversation, go check that out. You can listen to it anywhere you're listening to this, wherever you get your podcasts. But go check out part 1 of this conversation with Frank as well. If you want to connect with Frank and follow along with his stuff, you can find him at Reddy Fiction. That's REDDY fiction.com, or on Instagram, it's at Reddy Fiction. This week on the conversation, you're going to hear Frank talk about some of his favorite authors, some of the resources that have helped him in his journey, and a little bit more about him, his journey as an author. You're going to love it. Stick around. Check out this conversation with Frank Reddy. So you've always dreamed of writing a book, but you haven't done it yet. Why not? It's not because you don't have what it takes. You do. It's not because you don't have the time, and it's not because you don't have the right tools. I've become convinced the main thing holding you back from finally writing that book is your mindset. For far too long, we have subscribed to limiting beliefs that have sabotaged our goals, undercut our progress, and kept us from chasing our dreams of writing. Not anymore. Your story deserves to be written, and you are the only person who can write it. Fear and imposter syndrome are not the authors here. You are. The best way to battle your limiting beliefs is to get words on the page and to keep going when it gets tough. My name is TC Burr, and I am so excited to walk with you on this writing journey and to encourage you every step of the way. Because it's not that you haven't written your book, it's just that you haven't written your book yet. Let's change that. So one of the questions that I get a lot too is kind of around like what resources are out there for writers. So I'm curious if you've used any like think like craft books or podcasts or folks on YouTube that have been particularly helpful for you, or even things like, connecting with other writers, or like what have been some of those things that have helped you kind of perfect your craft or get better as a writer?
I think that this is going to be cliche because I think a lot of writers say this, but it's cliche because it's true. Stephen King's On Writing is it's like the Bible, dude. It's like this guy's good for a reason, and he's written down the how-tos here. And in that book, he talks about, and this is also elementary, but he talks about you have to read. I mean, you have to be a reader of all things. Whether it's in your genre, outside your genre. I mean, I read everything I get my hands on. And I've talked about this before on my Instagram page. What I found even more beneficial than reading like, classically good literature and well-recognized authors and stuff that's like, New York Times reviews well, is like bad writing. I mean, go out there and just pick random stuff off the shelf because you can really learn by other people's mistakes. You look at something and as you're reading it and you say to yourself, oh man, I'm losing interest in this story, or that piece of dialogue doesn't seem true. That's an education right there. And to me, it's easier to see stuff like that than it is to try to replicate good writing, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah, it actually makes me think of some advice. I don't remember where I heard this, but somebody said like, "Hey, go out onto Amazon and look up books and don't read any of the 5-star reviews. Read the bad reviews and figure out like what do people not like, what's missing from the story, and that can like help you inform like how to shape up your story." So kind of similarly makes me think of that. So that's interesting.
And similarly, while you're reading something that's great and you say to yourself, "Wow, that's really good. I like how you wrote that." Well, that's an educational moment. You have to I enjoy reading for fun, but while I'm reading, I've got like my writer's cap on and I'm studying what these people do.
Yeah.
Which can take the fun out of it, but it's educational every time you open a book.
Yeah, for sure. That's great. Speaking of opening a book, who are some of your favorite authors if you're reading for fun? I know it's hard to separate the two, right? But like if you're just reading for enjoyment, who are some of your favorite authors and what is it about those folks that make them so great?
So Donald Ray Pollock wrote this novel called The Devil All the Time, and I love the tone of it, and his writing is it's killer. The genre it's sort of this mix of religion meets Southern noir, which is kind of like on brand for the stuff I write.
Yeah.
Clay McLeod Chapman, who I've actually had the pleasure of meeting before, and he actually blurbed my forthcoming book. I enjoy his writing very much. He's kind of like a horror writer, supernatural kind of stuff. And if I'm allowed to talk about not just books but TV shows that are inspirational for me, True Detective is a show to me that is just specifically season one. If I could match the tone of that show with my writing, that would be just my dream. That show, I love how dark and spooky and spiritual it all is. That's a very inspirational show to me.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks for the recommendation. So going back to your first book, I have a couple of questions related to that. So first, one question is, I know you said you've been kind of writing for your whole life, but do you think that would you say that that first book that you published was the first like book that you wrote, or did you write other books prior to getting into having your work published?
I may have tried. I may have had some false starts on some writing projects. I wrote some short stories before that.
Okay.
It didn't really go anywhere. They didn't get published. Well, they got published by like some small little presses. But as far as novel, that was the first one I completed in its entirety. And man, it felt like a bear. Because when you're writing your first book, you're just doubting yourself the whole time. It's that imposter syndrome everybody talks about. You'll write some, you'll be like, man, what am I doing? Am I trying to write a book? I'm not an author. There's people out there that are authors. I'm not an author. So I think that one took me a really long time to complete because of some self doubt and just learning how to do it.
Yeah, that's great. So, kind of follow up questions on that. So, first, you said it took you a little bit longer. So, how much time, if you can remember, how long did it take you for that one? And has it gotten easier and faster with your subsequent books?
That's a good question. With that one, it took me a really long time. I think it took a couple of years to write it. And that's because when I started it like it was in a different location than where it ended up. And the characters were a little different. I had the building blocks for it, but it was not what it ended up being. That one took me at least a couple of years to write. I think after that, because I mean, the confidence that came with signing a little deal with a little press was huge. And after I'd written that first book, I believed and I knew that I could do it again. And so, when I wrote Eminent Domain, it came with some confidence, and it came with having been through this before and learning a few things. I think Eminent Domain took me maybe a year to write. Kofor Woods, I wrote during kind of a weird time in my life. I won't get too personal, but it was some stuff had happened, and I had time to focus just on that book. I'll just tell you, it was during COVID, and I got laid off, and there were some other things going on. So I had some time to just focus on that book for once in my life. I wrote Kofor Woods in like 3 months. It was
Wow.
crazy, just a
Wow.
flurry. That being said, it's my shortest book, but I saw the patterns, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do with that one. I knew it quick. So to answer your question, it's gotten quicker that I write them. I think the fourth one that I wrote probably took 6 months. So, but still generally not very long to write a
Yeah.
novel. So
Yeah.
my hope is that that trend continues, that I'm getting more efficient at these things.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So you talked a little bit in there about imposter syndrome and confidence as a writer. Like once you kind of cross the finish line with that first one, it gave you an extra boost of, hey, I can do this. I'm curious because I think there's a reason why everybody talks about imposter syndrome because at some point we all wrestle with it. Were there any things that helped you other than kind of getting that first one published? As you look back, like, hey, maybe it's a conversation you had with somebody or something you read or something that just made you kind of feel like, okay, actually I can do this. Like ideally before, were there anything like when you're in the like fog of war of like drafting that first one, like were there I'm sure there were probably moments like most of us where you're like, what am I doing? Like you've even said, what am I doing? I should just give this up. But like what kind of kept you going, I guess, when you had those moments?
Man, that's a good question. And I like that phrase, fog of war. I'm going to use that. That's good. I don't know, man. It was just, I felt in my heart I had a story to tell. I felt like this might sound kind of hokey, but when I have an idea come to me, it's almost like it's a thing outside of myself. Uh, like I've been inspired with this idea for a reason. I think when an idea hits me, it's got to really, really be inspiring. I've had many ideas that they don't go anywhere. But when something really hits me full force, I truly believe in it. And it was just an idea that I felt really a story that needed to be told. And I followed through with it for whatever reason.
That's great, man. Well, I'm really glad you did. I have just a few more questions, then I'll let you get out of here. So first, again, this show is intended for new and aspiring writers, and kind of with the aim of encouraging them to get going on their book and to keep going when it gets hard. So I guess if you were talking to somebody who's brand new and who's struggling, like what advice would you give them? Because I think a lot of people would look at somebody like you, and you may not think of yourself this way, Frank, but a lot of people would look at you and think, man, this guy's made it. He's like on the other side of what I'm doing now. So if you could offer any kind of wisdom or encouragement to that new person who's struggling, what would your best advice be?
I think when people look at an author who's been published a couple times or just been published at all, because I remember what this was like. You think, that's impossible. I could never get to that. Or you just think, well, that's, he's an author and I'm not. What they don't see is the like 10,000 hours of work that go into it. Hours and hours and hours and hours of reading, but mostly of just writing. I remember in high school and college, I would just, while a lot of my other friends were doing extracurricular stuff, I was just sitting down with a notebook and just writing just stream of consciousness stuff, just whatever came to my mind. At the time, I just had this idea that if I did this long enough, I would, quote unquote, find my voice. And I think it's true. I think you just have to do the work. You really have to just bust your butt and write and write and write. And you're eventually going to get really comfortable with it, I think. Also, I think when I first started writing, I had the writing part down, but I didn't understand the structure of a book. I'd read books like everybody, but I hadn't really studied, the narrative form. So I would write stuff that just maybe the sentences were beautifully constructed, but they didn't come together as a book, So write like crazy and read and study and figure out what it is that keeps you turning those pages when you're reading a book.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, and I think the first one about kind of working, like keep putting in the work, that's
Yeah.
true of so many things, man. And I think that's one thing that unfortunately we've kind of lost sight of in our modern culture with technology and social media. Like
Oh
you
yeah.
see everybody's highlight reel and you think like, well, this guy, he just decided to write and now he's published 4 books. Well, like yeah, but also there was years and years and years of struggle and putting in the reps and all. So I mean, I think that's a helpful reminder, especially at the beginning stages, because it's easy. And I can say, I've only been writing for a little over a year. It's easy for me to look at myself and think, man, when am I ever gonna get to the point where I'll finish this story and have this thing published and start, but recognizing that all of that work that you're putting in is building towards something. And even if those words never make it into a print, they're making you better as a writer. They're getting you more comfortable with your craft, and they're kind of helping you shape that journey for yourself. So I think that's great, man.
I would say, young writers just fall in love with the process.
Yeah.
Don't sit there obsessing over the end game of seeing it, on a bookshelf. You gotta put in the work first because it's everything.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, cool, man. Well, hey, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for being willing to meet with me today. I just have a really one last question, and it's an easy one. How do people find your work? How do people get in touch with you? Give me your website, social media. Where do they buy your books? Give me all that.
Sure. So on Instagram, my handle is that the word people use?
I think so.
I'm an old guy. It's Reddy Fiction, REDDY Fiction, and my website is readyfiction.com. And I think if you go there, you can find anything you need.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much, Frank. This has been a true joy to talk with you. Really appreciate all your wisdom, and yeah, hope you have a great day, man. Thanks.
Thank you. You too.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you would do me a huge favor, if you got value out of this podcast, which I'm assuming maybe you did since you're still here, would you scroll down to the bottom of your podcast app and rate and review the show? and maybe share it with someone on social media or with a friend, just in a conversation. It would mean so much to get this message out to more people, and I think it would be amazing if you would share it. So that would be, as a personal favor to me, I'd really love it. Also, if you want to know more about me and what I'm working on, you can visit my website. It's tcburr.com. I hope you'll check it out. You can contact me there. Thanks again, and I really appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon.